What you're looking at is a 7-inch Project 399 Dead Cat, designed by Jordan Timken. It's probably the best flying 7-inch drone that I have built to date. This is going to be one of my, hopefully one of 2 or 3 long-range builds that I'm going to be building for next year. I've done something a bit different with this one that I don't think anyone else has done with their Dead Cat 399. This one's got 2 cameras on it. It's got FPV at the front. It's got FPV at the back, so I can fly backwards just as easily as I can fly forwards. I don't have as much camera tilt, and there's a reason for that. If you're flying backwards with that much up tilt on your GoPro, when you go to your backup camera, if you're flying with a lot of up tilt, you're just going to look at the sky. So I'm about 20 degrees on the front camera, 20 degrees on the top camera, 5 degrees maybe on the back camera, and you can see there's not much space, so I couldn't get much more if I wanted to. But it works well. My last video I uploaded, the first part of the video was flown with this one, and then when I clipped to a different bit of video, it's obvious I was flying in 3D. I'll get to that build here in a minute. This drone was made in part due to it's an evolution of a conversation I had with WildWilly on the Rotor Riot Quad Camp online. We had been discussing maybe having 2 cameras on the front, one being 15-20 degrees for juicy style flying like what he does with JohnnyFPV, as well as CricketFPV and a few others who, you know, their style is juicy. It's due to their low camera tilt. Well, what if you wanted to be able to do that as well as fly like MattyStuntz? You could put another camera up here at the top of the GoPro mount at like 65 degrees, 45 degrees on your camera, 20 degrees on this one, and you could switch back and forth. It'd give you the ability to fly out, be a little bit more efficient getting to where you want to fly. Once you get there, flick to the other camera, MattyStunt the hell out of the damn thing, basically, you know, fly inverted from way out like FlorentRoque and MattyStuntz, do a couple cyclone / trippy spins, whatever you need to do. And then you could flip back to your other camera and come on back, and you could be a little bit more efficient, have that thrust angle working for you. I never made it to that evolution because as I was sitting here thinking about a top cam and a bottom cam, I said, you know what, I'd rather have a backup cam. I'd rather fly backwards. At the heart of this build is a BIX 2-channel switch. I've got my video coming out of my camera and going into my on-screen display. It then comes out of there, goes into input 1 of the switch. I do that so I have an on-screen display for the forward cam only, and then the backwards cam, the backup cam, quit interrupting. Sorry about that, Booger's a little bit of a pest. Anyway, backup cam has no on-screen display, forwards cam has on-screen display. I kept it that way back when, because unlike this build where I go from no props in view to props in view, when I'm on my 3D build or something like that, I wanted to have on-screen display for knowing, hey, when I see that, I'm forwards flight and I'm upright. So I'm plugged in. I have my FPV monitor over here. You can see I'm getting my on-screen display. Clearly that's the front camera. If I flick the switch on my transmitter, I go to the back, front, back. Very quick switching. This is typical performance that I've been having from these switches. They go from front to back with very low latency delay. They're also a very small switch. I'll get to those here in a minute when I take a top plate off of one and show you how small they are and where I can put them. They have a voltage range that is from like 3 cell all the way up to 6 cell, but they've got a caution on the 6 cell. If you go to Ready Made RC, if you go to Pyroflip, you'll see those switches for sale. They're like 11 bucks. Be careful soldering them up. I have lifted a pad off of one of the switches, and basically that switch was toast. So luckily I buy multiple of them, so I've got them. This is version 1 essentially of what I've been doing with regards to front cam and a back cam. There was a version 2. It didn't live very long because as soon as I started playing with 3D flight, I went to fly over a body of water, and I think I snagged my antenna and augured right in. And so version 2, which was forwards upright and backwards inverted, It sits at the bottom of a river, or not a river, but a lake, and I haven't gotten it back despite 8 hours of being in a wetsuit looking for it. So it's gone, so I can't show you version 2, but I do have a version 3, and that's the 3D build. I'll get that going here in just a sec, and we'll go over that. One thing I can say is the BIC switch seems to not enjoy having the quad plugged in first, then having the transmitter turned on. If you're going to use one of these, I suggest always having your transmitter turned on. And when you plug in, it seems to detect the PWM output, and it ends up switching more reliably. But if you do the opposite, you'll see what I mean. Your video feed ends up having lines through it. It's like the switch is not detecting the min or the max PWM, and something's going on in the switch. So if you turn the transmitter on and then you plug your drone in, it seems to work just fine. On this build, as I flick the switch to go from forwards and backwards, that's when the switch is also controlling a mix. I'm replacing my pitch and my roll on this build when I flick the switch, so that way when I flick it, I am basically flying backwards, but I might as well be flying forwards because everything's the same, pitch and roll, invert. So that way, as long as I hold my switch down and I'm flying, I'm good to go. That's why I called it a CheaterKwad. That basically, regardless of if I'm flying backwards upright or if I'm on the 3D quad going forwards inverted or backwards inverted, depending on what switch I've hit, it's, to me, like I'm flying right side up. It does not, it's not a challenge, it's cheating. So hence the CheaterKwad. So here is the CheaterKwad version 3. It could be because it's got 3 cameras, but it's really because it's the third evolution of what I've been doing. Version 1 was upright forwards with upright backwards. Version 2 was upright forwards with backwards inverted, and the reason I did that had to do all with the up tilt. I figured out that if I'm flying forwards upright, that if I were to go inverted backwards, I could go to a down tilt that was inverted, and it would give me basically the parallels on the GoPro to the inverted backup camera. Version 2 is what I lost in the lake. I was coming in so close to the ground, or to the water inverted, and I'm pretty sure I drugged my antenna and I augured right in and kissed that goodbye. That was a build that had StingerSwarm motors on them, and as far as I know, they're still Stinger swamming. So they are in the lake. I lost that GoPro footage. I really want it, but that was months ago. So this is version 3. Here's my BIC switches. I've got one on this side. I've got one on the other side. And what's end up happening here is when I go inverted, let me get it focused. I've got my video from the front upright camera going to the OSD of my Hobbywing V2 stack. The output goes into one of the switches. And then when I invert, what's going to happen is I'm coming off of uprights forwards, I'm going to a forwards inverted, and it's kind of like the default. So when I flip this switch, it actually comes over and it's getting the output off of one of these switches. This switch does not get controlled unless I flick a secondary switch on my controller, and the reason I'm doing it this way is so that way it's 2 different movements on my controller. I don't trust a 3-position switch. Gross muscle movements are something you can count on, basically screwing you up. If you have a 3-position switch and under pressure, you go past that middle position, you're going to go straight to the 3rd position, and it's going to mess you up. With stress, fine motor control goes out the window. So that's why I use 2-position switches. I'd use one to go inverted, and then if I want to go from forwards inverted to backwards inverted, that's where I flick the other switch. So it's a 2-step process. You can kind of see it in my videos. I'll usually roll from upright to inverted forwards, and when I'm doing that, then at some point I can turn around and I can go to the backwards inverted by flicking the other switch, usually on a yaw. There's multiple different steps of mixes. So I've got a switch that when I go from forwards upright to forwards inverted, I've got a mix there. And then when I go from forwards inverted to backwards inverted, I have yet another mix, and those get replaced on the switch. So that means on my Crossfire, which, sorry, it's hard to find in this mess. So there it is, right there. That's my Crossfire Nano. Focus. My Crossfire Nano has channel 3, channel 4 available. I have it outputting is like channel 6 and channel 7. One of those will control one switch, one of those will control the other switch. I just wanted to bypass the flight controller. I don't have outputs on the flight controller to control them, but fortunately the Nano is extremely easy to set up to put out PWM. So there is CheaterKwad version 3.0. I'm using S6T Pros 2500 on a 1300 milliamp 4 cell. I'm getting about 2 minutes of flight time. The props for 3D are the AliExpress 50-30 props. They're horribly inefficient. This thing is not a lightweight build, and you're lucky if you get 2 minutes of flight time. So you got to make the most of it, or you've got to have it almost choreographed in your head what you want to do. You can see I've got some scrapes on my antenna up here from where I've been able to come in upside down so close to the ground that I'm dragging my antenna. You probably saw that in the last video. CheaterKwad makes it easy. Flying forwards upright, go inverted. Hey, in my goggles, by my controller, I'm still flying forwards upright. I can be flying backwards inverted, and by my controller and what I see in my goggles, I am still flying upright. So I am cheating. I replaced talent with technology. Alright, so I'm back and I'm plugged in. The CheaterKwad sits on the bench, and here's my on-screen display. I've got the battery voltage, RSSI, all of those things on the screen, so obviously I am forwards and upright. I did something slightly different with this. I actually used a different on-screen display. I remembered that the cameras are using on-screen displays these days. So now, when I flick my switch and I go to inverted forwards, you can see down in the bottom left, I used the OSD info for basically craft naming on my RunCam Swifts, and I put F inverted. So now I know I'm forwards and inverted. If I hit my switch to the other camera, now I've got rear inverted, and I put it on the other side. So I've got on-screen display, but it's just for the purposes of identifying forwards inverted, rearwards inverted. So that helps me greatly sometimes. It's not like I'm going to forget which switch I'm holding, because I'm momentary from going from forwards to backwards on my inverted camera. And then I'm using a toggle switch that I don't have to hold down for going from forwards upright to forwards inverted. But I put some thought into it, at least, to kind of help. Now you have something visual to go with tactile, so you know what you got going on when you're flying. So as you can see, I've now got this thing going forwards inverted, but when I'm inverted, everything looks upright. So looking back at the CheaterKwad, you can see I've got a little bit of modification I had to do in order to get things to fit. There's a really tight fit in there. When I first started flying this, I did not have good angles. Basically, my inverted forwards camera was at a much steeper angle. So when I flew inverted, my GoPro was staring at the ground most of the time. I had to get the TPU mounts kind of spaced correctly. I had to cut out a little bit of the base to get a little bit more clearance. I had a crash that I went to quad camp in Hesperia, and I pretty much demoed the bottom camera. I broke the housing off of one of these. I shattered the lens. Had to rebuild. Got it back up and running. Managed to get like 2 more packs flying it. We went to the corrals. So there's some video of it flying and some transitions. At the time I went to quad camp, I maybe had 6 to 8 packs on this. I didn't have a lot of experience flying it. That's a 2.1 lens at the back. It's a 2.1 lens on the top. That's like the 2.3 because I crashed this thing and shattered a lens. I've since got some more, gotten some more lenses, but I might keep that 2.3 on there so that way hopefully when I'm flying inverted I can maybe shoot some gaps a little bit better. Had a crash the other day and it pushed things around so where I actually have a better angle now on that bottom forwards inverted camera, and it's been working better for me. I can almost come in and it's given me a better angle on the GoPro for when I'm flying, so the crash actually helped me. I think what happened is when I hit, I had bent that connector, and the connector was what was holding me back. So if I notched that out a little bit more, it would give me a lot better camera positioning for being able to go inverted and do things. I do want some down tilt, that way I can fly forwards while inverted, but you really don't need that much. It seems like the back camera with a little bit more inverted angle is a better thing. My last video I flew, it was with that forward inverted camera tilt, and switching in a roll going from forwards upright to forwards inverted was very natural. There's a point where it almost seems like I defy gravity. You can see it in the last video where it looks like I'm doing something in post where I'm just kind of hovering there, stopped upside down, but it wasn't through editing. It was this quad. Roll into inverted, flick the switch, kind of, if you can get it smooth enough on your transition, you know what, you're going to pull off some interesting stuff. It's going to melt minds, maybe. This is one of those things that I don't know if it's a gimmick. I don't know if it's going to be a trend. I did it so that you can get interesting footage. I did it to take the skill out of it. It's, again, not to sit here and beat a dead horse, but it's cheating. This is the CheaterKwad. Love it, hate it, it is what it is, but I did it for the footage. To be able to go backwards, upside down, and shoot a gap, go under my truck, and keep on going for a long distance, you're going to have a tool like this. The Insta camera that you can see chopped the heck out of my battery leads. I get to take it apart and fix that at some point. But to stop from rambling on, here in a sec, I will plug in and I will show you my Betaflight 3D settings. So that way, if somebody wants to build one of these, you can go. ZoeFPV, her tutorials helped a lot, but I had to go through and figure a few things out to try and get my mixing right for what I want to do. Because here's the deal, on my throttle, when I go inverted, I am not at a middle stick where from 1500 upwards is my upwards throttle and down, and from 1500 downwards is my inverted. I have split my throttle so that way when I am on forwards upright, I have the full range. When I go into a transition, I usually blip the throttle, cut throttle, do my roll, flick my switch, and now I'm inverted and I have my full range of throttle while inverted. Okay, here's my CheaterKwad 3D settings. I'm running D-Shot 1200 and I've got a min throttle value of 5. This is probably the thing that people want to see the most. Pretty small deadband, around 1500. It's because I typically reduce throttle, almost completely cut throttle, because I want my transitions to appear smooth around that neutral area of my transitions. So here's the thing with the transitions. There's a couple different ways to do them. Some take some muscle memory, I guess, or some thinking, and that's part of the reason why my on-screen display shows forward inverted, rearward inverted. So that way I can, as I'm flying, if I need to try and figure out a transition, I can think about it for a minute and figure out what I got to do with my sticks. Because here's the thing. Back to the quad. Say you want to do a power loop, and in that power loop, You want to come up, you're pulling back on your stick as you climb, you're inverted, and then you switch. Your habit is that you're thinking power loop. So pulling back on the stick from going forwards upright, now you're going to inverted. And if you're pulling back on your stick when you transition, guess what? You're gonna switch your rates. So now as soon as you flip that switch, if you're pulling back on your stick, you're gonna flop right back over, and it's gonna basically bring you right into the ground. That's how I crashed at Quad Camp. The interesting thing is, let me unplug this before I short out.
Telemetry lost.
Okay. Back to natural versus unnatural transitions. So, something interesting about the way these switches are working and what they allow me to do. If I'm flying forwards upright and I go to transition to forwards inverted, roll is the one axis I don't have to mess with. So if I come up and I roll over as I'm going inverted, I flick the switch at minimum throttle, and then I start to bring it back in, and I can make it pretty darn seamless. Power loop from forwards upright to forwards inverted is the one that will be the hardest, because as you're coming up to something, right about here is when you want to flick the switch. Well, what happens is you switch to this switch, and if you're still if you're still pulling back on the switch, that's one of the axes you've inverted. So now it's going to be like flying upright again. You're still pulling back on the switch, you're going to flip again, okay? So as you come up on your power loop, if you're forwards upright, when you go forwards inverted, you've actually got to remember to pitch down a little bit and keep trucking. Interesting thing about these switches is, since I have two switches on my controller, I can actually preload my backup camera. I can be on that camera and have it outputting by holding down my momentary switch, so that way when I go to do my transition, when I flick that switch to go inverted, it's going to actually be pretty natural. What that ends up doing is, I'm holding the backup camera, I can come up to something looking at it, and as I'm coming up over the top of it, if I flick the switch to go inverted, I'm switching to here, and it's like a negative and a negative equal a positive. By preloading that switch, when I flick to inverted, my pitch stays the same. So I can act, and this is coming eventually, when I'll hopefully be able to do is be flying towards something, come up underneath of it, looking at it, flick the switch right about here, going to the backup camera, bypassing the inverted forwards camera completely, just switching from forwards upright to backwards inverted. Come up to something, look at it, flick the switch, and I can stay on my pitch axis, continue pulling back, and I'll be able to flick right at side up. So my transition will be looking at it, transition, and fly away from it, looking at it upside down. You've seen me be able to do you've been able to see me do a upside down inverted to strike that. Upside down inverted is redundant. Inverted forwards to inverted backwards. When I'm doing that, yaw is my axis that hasn't changed. So as I'm coming around, I can look at something, I can yaw spin into it, and as I look at it, I can flick the switch, and my momentum will carry me away from it. You saw that with my most recent video. I did it both on the CheaterKwad V1 7-inch and on this little guy. As I come around the trees before going underneath the truck, I'm looking at something. As I come around it, flick the switch, yaw spinning off of it, and now I'm flying away from it, looking at the thing I just coming towards. I don't know what else to say. It's cheating. I don't own this. This is all readily available components. Some other people have been out there doing some 2-camera builds. The Prestige, he got a mention by Josh Bardwell. Quad, I think is his name. He did some really great flying with a quad that had dual cams. They were both upright, one at the front, one at the back. He showed a build tutorial. He may have even gotten into how to change your mixes on the transmitter. So he did one about 3 weeks before I built my very first one. I think I might be the first person to have done a 3D 3-camera build. I have no ego built up in this. I'm sharing this with all of you, so that way hopefully someone else will build one, someone with more talent than me even. Go out. I want to see the people that are gifted build these things. I want to see the type of video they get. My honest to God thing that I would love to see would be a frame that could house cameras and give them a little bit more protection, give them a little bit more to manipulate the distances between the cameras for a more optimal up tilt, down tilt. There are no frames out there for this. So yeah, what can I say? This is the inspiration for why I chose the name Dividing by Zero. I wanted to test limits. There's no way in heck you're gonna be able to fly backwards, upside down, shooting gaps. So you need a camera. You need a backup camera.